Episode 3.
Coming to you live from Montreal, Quebec, Canada. This is CVS. And now here's your host, David Ross.
Hi, welcome to episode 3. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about my upcoming guest, my first live stream guest. But first I want to just answer a couple of questions that I got. Some people have been asking a couple of questions. So first of all, do I have a website? Yes, I do, but it's under construction. It's going to be under construction for a little while yet because I'm just working on it very part-time. So probably in the spring, that'll be cvs-podcast.com. I already have the domain, and I had the site up before, but I'm completely revamping it. I want to have more of a database-driven setup so that I can have all of my data in one place and all my episodes in one place and do a statistical analysis. How many masses have been said for each particular patron or guest, how many masses have been said and how many have been said in total, and that sort of thing, a statistical analysis. I can have graphs and curves and stuff. So that'll be fun. And another question I got was about my shrine. It was from one of my favorite atheist trolls, Robert White. He was talking, he was sort of laughing, chuckling that I've got a shrine going. I think he was referring to what he sees on camera, little candles and images and stuff like that. But I do have a proper home shrine. I'll just I've set up a camera in my shrine, which you can see right behind me here. The shrine, you can see the sort of where I sit and read. And I've got books and stuff like that, and I've got a few images around, but I've got another camera in there so you can see the actual shrine setup itself. Got some candles lit because every morning I go in, say a little few prayers, and light some candles. And the incense I light at night for the rosary. You can see my rosary beads there on the wall. And I've got a couple of crucifixes and stuff like that. Just a basic setup. I've got a little wooden kneeler you can see at the bottom of the screen. The dark wooden box is a bread box, which is ironic because it says in English and in French bread, but if you read the French word bread, which is pain, P-A-I-N, it looks like the English word pain. So we've got basically pain bread written on this box, which I think is very Catholic. Pain bread, it's like the sacrifice of Christ in the Eucharist. All that pain is now represented in a bloodless way in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. So I like having that pain bread box, and I keep my incense in there. I keep my candles in there, different stuff in there, little icons and medals, miraculous medals and stuff like that. So that's my shrine. That's my home shrine. And obviously I have images. I think you can see above the wooden box, you can see a little strip of paper that's taped to the wall right at the top of the screen. That's all 20 mysteries of the rosary, so I can glance up at those while I'm doing the rosary and get stimulated by the images of the rosary. So that's it for that question of the shrine, and for the question of the website. The website will be coming up soon, like I said. But speaking of what's coming up, I want to talk about my guest. That I've got a guest scheduled for Saturday. He goes by the name of Canadian Catholic, and he is a nice young man from Toronto. I don't want to share too much about him because I think he likes to keep his identity under wraps, but seems like a nice kid. And I discovered him because, again, Robert White turned me on to him inadvertently, but he was mocking and ridiculing him. Sent me a link to an RN Raw discussion on RN Raw's channel, one of these live stream chats, and it went on for an hour and a half, 2 hours maybe. Quite long, a little bit rambling, I wanted to interject a couple of times to defend Christ and his church, but we each have our own meandering way of expressing our ideas, and it's hard when you're being attacked by Aaron Ra. And he was quite aggressive. He apologized for being a little bit impatient this time, but he's heard the same old stories time and time again, and he just doesn't understand. And I like Aaron Ra. I think everyone who knows me knows that I've got a little man crush on Aaron Ra. I think he's a real sweetheart, and I think he's got a big heart, and he's a nice guy. But when I do my live stream interviews with my guests, I'm not going to use the 9 categories. I used to use 9 categories: Catholic, Protestant, etc., Muslim, atheist, whatever, Jew. Now I've decided, I've got a little infographic here I'm going to show you. I've got a different approach now. I'm going to use 3 different worldviews. And during the course of my interviews, I'm just going to ask people to pick and choose for themselves which one they're most comfortable with. Are they most comfortable with monism, monotheism, or nihilism? And we can, we're free to play with those labels. It doesn't have to be, the guest doesn't have to identify as a monist or as a monotheist or as a nihilist, but they do have to commit to one of these 3 zones on this diagnostic map, this Venn diagram of the 3 worldviews, which are really just 2 components. There's God and there's not God. And if you believe that only God exists, then I call that monism, but you're free to call it something else if you'd like. If you believe that only not God exists, then you're free to call it something other than nihilism. I just call it nihilism as a shorthand. And if you believe in both God and not God, as I do, then I would refer to that as a monotheist. I would refer to that as monotheism, but you're certainly free to use a different label for it. The essential question is, do you believe in God? Yes or no. And do you believe in not God? Yes or no. And there are all kinds of very interesting implications when you ask these very, very simple fundamental questions. There are all kinds of implications that come up. You know, when we think about, from a Catholic perspective, when we think about monism, this could be roughly identified with presumption that only God exists, and so I exist, therefore I am God, or at least part of God, as the pantheists would say, or as many in the East would say. Separation is an illusion, and non-duality is the only reality, and so we have nothing to worry about, literally. There's no hell. It's just a temporary illusion of separation, and the ultimate reality is heaven and God, because that's all that there is, right? I was a pantheist for many years. Many people, wittingly or unwittingly, I think, are pantheists of one type or another. I think it's a very, very, very common worldview, not only in the East, but even here in the West, even among atheists and agnostics. I think it is very, very common. So that is what Pascal would call the error of presumption. And then on the other side of the safe, narrow path is the opposite sin, the sin of despair, what I've called nihilism, where you believe that only not God exists. So, I mean, we'd be hard-pressed to deny the fact that we exist. And if we do deny the fact that we exist, we affirm the fact that we exist. I think, therefore I am. We cannot deny it without affirming it. So even the nihilist, quote unquote nihilist, this is a position really which is untenable, obviously, but in principle, someone could be leaning toward nihilism and could want to deny even their own existence. I know people that want to deny their own existence. I know people that do deny their own existence, and they fail to see the absurdity and the contradiction that's entailed in their denial of their very self and their very existence. But nonetheless, they want to deny their existence. These people are few and far between. You might argue that they are clinically insane, but they're all types of people with all types of ideas, and people play with ideas in the course of their journey toward God. If God willing, that's where they're headed ultimately, and I hope that most of us are, if not all of us. So on one side we have presumption, on the other side despair. I've labeled these monism and nihilism, and then that sweet spot in the center, of course, is monotheism. So to admit that God exists, but that you yourself are not God, I think this is the best position to hold, obviously. And Pascal describes this as filial love, meaning the love of a good child toward a good parent. It's the ideal path to walk. It's the narrow way, the only way, and that way has a name. It's Jesus Christ. And we see in Jesus Christ God and not God. We see the divine and the human. We see the infinite and the finite. And this is the bridge. Jesus Christ is not only the way, he's not only the door, but he is the bridge between the infinite and the finite. And when we have difficulty suffering and being patient and enduring all of the hardships of life and the boredom of life, the drudgery of work and so on and so forth, we have to think about Jesus Christ, who endured all of it and more, infinitely more. And so we, in a sense, we have an example in Jesus Christ of how to be finite and how to have our eyes always turned heavenward so that we can have that hope, that supernatural virtue of hope that will lead us to virtue and will ultimately lead us to God. Because Christ's will was free and his will was human. He had a human will and a divine will, obviously, but he has a human will, and that will was aligned perfectly with the will of God. And that's an example for us. That's what we need to do. That's what we need to strive to do with God's help. I'm not saying it's easy. It's certainly not easy for me. And if you look at my life, if you look at my thoughts, words, deeds, and omissions, you'll see that my track record is not great. But to be a monotheist here below in the church militant is a struggle, and it's guaranteed that we're going to fall. And if we say that we do not sin, then we are liars. So we have to admit that we're sinners. We need to avail ourselves of the sacrament of reconciliation, among other sacraments, and continue our walk with Christ and humble ourselves every time we do fall. So when I introduce a new guest on my live stream, I'm not going to ask them to choose one of 9 categories. Rather, I'm going to ask them to choose simply one of these 3. And there may or may not be a little bit of discussion with the guest, depending on how interesting their answer is and how readily they identify with one of the categories. There will be more or less banter and discussion about all the implications and the nuances of each of these positions on this diagnostic map of the 3 kinds of worldviews. Now, obviously, you can have a Christian who is a monist, you can have a Christian who's a monotheist, and you could have a Christian who is a nihilist, according to these broad definitions. And same thing with a Jew or a Muslim or an atheist. It's one of the reasons why I'm excited to use this new diagnostic. It's because it cuts to the quick and it eliminates some of the wolves in sheep's clothing. These people like to hide, right? There are atheists that like to hide behind agnosticism, and they're de facto pantheists, monists. There are other atheists that like to hide their nihilism, and we tend to be ashamed of these fundamental positions. Even monotheists tend to be ashamed of the worldview that they adhere to, because those around them might question it or might think it's silly or fabulous to believe what we are obliged to believe as monotheists. But really what we need to do, each of us, is to live our worldview fully and embrace it, and that's the only way to be authentic and get to God. So that's it for today. Thanks for listening. We'll talk soon. God bless.
For as little as $1 per month, you can support the charitable mission of CVS, which has already enrolled hundreds of guests and patrons and their immediate families in the Scalabrini League of the Missionary Fathers of St. Charles Borromeo. By your generous support, you too participate in these benefits. A special Mass offered on each day of the year, and the devotion and good works performed by the members of the Society Thank you for your generous support.